Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined for the first time by John Hughes, because you and I haven't shared a screen. I was going to say a stage. Not yet. We've certainly not shared a screen on the Acsom Bulletin yet. How are you doing, John?
I'm very well, mate. Very well. I'm sure we're both going to miss Kev's rather unique take on things today. I'm sure no one can match the man for an analogy. So,
I always remember, the Viz used to release these wee books, and it was just all the different wording, etc., that they used, and phrases and explanations thereof. And I'm just waiting for the Kevin Graham version of his analogies. But maybe one of these days he'll be able to explain them to us. Kev is otherwise engaged. Acsom does have a team of contributors, often referred to, in fact, John, as the Acsom cult, which is fine. I'm sure that's what they called us. I'm sure it is. But we're ever evolving. So, yesterday on a Tuesday, you often see Natasha. Natasha's in Germany. So, obviously, we have a pool or a cult pool of players who can come in. So, tonight, I'll be joined by Kevin McCluskey for the game. Really looking forward to that. And if he's fit, he has got a late match fitness test. Colin Watt will also be joining me. He had to sit out on Monday because he was ill. But that's just the way it goes. That's the way it goes.
Well, I'm having to make preparations for next week. I'm flying over for the game next week. And I have all sorts of preparations to make for that. I've got all this gear to take with me. And I have, usually stay with my brother, but his Wi-Fi is unbelievably bad, so I've got to move houses, and get it all. And you talk about a late fitness test. I hope to be dying on next Wednesday after the celebrations, but
I hope so
we'll
as
see
well.
how we go.
I hope so as well, absolutely. As always, we're keen to hear your thoughts. We're going to be talking, obviously, about tonight's game. I noticed in the comment section, I do read them in the comment section on the YouTube channel, someone was getting stick for the pronunciation of tonight's opponents. So I have gone as far to consulting YouTube, and YouTube has told me that it's Leipzig. That's the way that you pronounce it. I don't know if someone's been calling it Leipzig. I'm not sure. But we are playing them tonight, John. It's also today, 100 years ago, Jock Stein was born. And we're going to have a wee dig about that as well. We're going to have a wee talk about Celtic's youth, the whole policy, the chat around Ben Doak and others, a golden generation perhaps lost. There's a whole podcast in that. We'll be touching on some of the players who will be missing tonight and how big their omissions are going to be as well, John, because I think that's a big focus. I mean, just generally speaking, I was listening yesterday with interest, Big Lawrence talking about tonight's game, what we have to take from it. I guess when I was looking at these fixtures, I thought, right, I'm writing off Real Madrid. I'm writing off both those games, right? And then I thought, if we can take something in our away encounters against Shakhtar and Leipzig, I'll be happy. But then you've got to win both home games. And that was kind of my view when we came in. And if we come away with that, I think I'd be delighted. We actually might not get through on 8 points, but I would be delighted with that as Ange's first taste of Champions League group football. What's your take on it?
I think we need to take a point tonight. Realistically, there's no guarantee of winning the two home games. But I think that, if we take a point tonight, it really knocks the wind out of Leipzig. So they'll be struggling to get through from that point on. So it's a must-win game for them. It's a must-take-a-point game for me. So it puts them under pressure, and it opens up, it makes it more interesting in as much as not that they're a team that would ever sit back, but they have to come at us. Mm-hmm. I know this has been covered at their forum and also, but I mean, I was looking back at their 3 games since Rosa has taken over. So obviously they beat Dortmund 3-0. They lost 3-0 in Mönchengladbach, and they won 4 against Bochum. Bochum, you can just dismiss that because that's like us bumping Dundee United. They're bottom of the table and they're dreadful. So the only 2 games you have to go on is Mönchengladbach and Dortmund. The Dortmund game was his first game in. He is the former Dortmund manager. He immediately changed their formation to basically play against Dortmund. So he set it up to stop all ball progression coming from their centre halves and their defensive midfield players, and that worked a treat for them. Now, Dortmund have been sketchy anyway, form-wise, but they were at the top of the table at that point, performance-wise, should I say. But it's very, very difficult to take anything from that. What I would say is they've had a really poor season so far by their standards. Yes, there's a new manager in, but this is not, Ange, the new manager. He hasn't had a transfer window, and he's probably not, even when there is a transfer window, it doesn't look like they're going to give him any money anyway. They seem to think that this squad should be good enough. And they're right on paper. On paper, they're a tremendous squad. So what we need to be concerned about tonight, who's going to turn up? Are they going to be the paper tigers? Are they going to be the bulls? So, we need to be wary of that. And, as everyone has mentioned, on paper, they are obviously, to me, a better side than us. But the thing about it is, it doesn't count for anything. It just doesn't count for anything when you're... I would say we are both in a sort of similar place at the moment. So I'm very anxious about this game, I have to say. Very anxious. I'm not... I'm excited for it, but I'm far more anxious than I'm excited. I just feel that with us, the way that we're playing as well, we're in what I call should have form, So the negatives of should have is we should have buried Shakhtar, we should have beaten St Mirren, we should have buried Motherwell, we should have taken our chances, we should have been faster in transition with more pace and more purpose in passing, we should have better concentration, we should have played for 90 minutes. Now, the upside of should have is could have. We could have done all those things. Which means that we have the ability to do those things, So it's not like we are outmatched completely here as we have been in the past. We are not. We are on a par with these, at least in my view. Yes, on a bad day they could do some damage, but we could absolutely pummel them on a bad day for them as well. So, and this is the point. Who's going to turn up today? I really don't know. And that includes us. Who's going to turn up? Is Celtic going to turn up tonight? I don't know.
No, you're right. And if they do, then you can see someone like Jota in full flight. Some of the players who are in there are, I guess, not first picks for Ange Postecoglou. We'll get to some of them. Another should have, could have. Maeda opening and scoring against Real Madrid. McGregor's strike from distance, which, could have ricocheted into the back of the net. So I totally get what you mean. And that's where the frustration creeps in, John, because when you come away from these games, you're thinking to yourself, we could have had something better from each of the games that you've actually mentioned. They should have won against St Mirren. I'm not buying into the fact that the wheels have come off. Absolutely not. I still think it's a blip. There's a few comments I'm going to bring up here who would agree with that as well. Jungle Lion, regular contributor, always a pleasure to see you coming in on the YouTube. Tough gig tonight, hopefully a win, take a draw, but the league is more important. Talking of gigs, we just posted a picture of Prince playing at Celtic Park in 1992, John. I wasn't at that gig. Shakespeare's sister supported him, and there were at least one Celtic fan in their ranks. But I was at the U2 gig a year later. But looking at that period, we had Bryan Adams playing at Celtic Park as well. And by the way, we also had Cliff Richard playing at Celtic Park. I'm going to dig the photos out and put them up. Do you think that was something around about that time? I am digressing, John. Apologies in advance. When it comes to Celtic, I sometimes go down some wee rabbit holes. Was that the likes of Terry Cassidy, etc., trying to find other streams of income at Celtic at that time? It seems to be a glut of concerts at Celtic Park.
Well, clearly it was. And, to be honest, if you followed Celtic in the 90s, those were some of the best things that happened at Celtic Park during that entire decade, because the rest of it was pretty grim. We were trying everything, because we were, we couldn't, it's basically the shoe's on the other foot now. We couldn't compete with Rangers and their financial dealings. And we weren't really aware of that at that point of where that was going to lead. We were just a step behind. We were always a step behind, and you know, I mean, I hated the 90s for that reason, you know. And, you know, he's talking about Andy Gorham broke our hearts and we should have won this game and we should have won that game. But those are the games, and, you know, we've had this against sides that were better before. They were a better side than us for the most part, and therefore you're clinging on to wee chances and missed opportunities and all the rest of it. And you're like, oh, what if we did it? You know, no, you know, we just... for the most part, we weren't good enough. And, of course, we were doing everything we could to try and raise money, to try and, you know, to combat that. But, hey, you know what? All worked out in the end.
It did. I always look back at that period as well, John, and I think about, I know after the centenary year, Rangers gave us 2 hammerings, 4-1 and 5-1. But if you look at the 90s, that period in the doldrums, in terms of hammerings, we always turned up. I think except one time when they beat us 4-2 and they went into a 3-0 lead after like 20 minutes or something like that. But we always turned up. We always gave them a game. And, you know, sometimes the win that Celtic got was the final game of the season when the league was gone. But it's not as if they pulverised us like we were for season upon season, pulverising Rangers recently.
Yeah, you've just brought back a terrible flashback there. I think that 4-1 game... was that the game that McAvenny scored first?
Yes. And I think he broke his arm.
Well, we got tickets for that game, myself and my brother. Barry Ferguson was playing football with my stepbrother at that time. And we got tickets from Derek Ferguson. We were in the Rangers stand. And I'm entirely convinced he told everyone before we got there who we were. Because, oh my God, it was brutal. The looks we were getting, it was absolutely desperate. So we bolted at half time because it was, you know, McAvenny scores first and you're doing that thing where it's like, that's terrible. And then, you know, from there on in, we were getting absolutely pummeled. So we bolted at half time.
Oh, don't blame me. I think there's probably a podcast in Acsom contributors being in the away end. I know that JP certainly has got quite a few experiences of that as well, and you've just got that instant reaction to Celtic scoring a goal. So you're taking your...
One second, I have my computer's not plugged in properly. There we
go.
Problem.
I will run with it.
That's it.
That's fine.
Human error, as always.
No problem at all. We will proceed. Jungle Line, just before you go, Jungle Line, are the Irish pubs back open in Liverpool? Well, the reason I bring that up is we did see some tricolours. We've seen some Celtic flags at Anfield last night. And, you know, when I look at Liverpool, there's been a couple of really interesting episodes on Acsom, if I don't say so myself, over the last few years. One of which, back in the days before the world turned into video experts and everybody started StreamYarding and Zooming and all that kind of stuff, there was a great audio podcast with Professor Phil Scraton, who obviously was at the head of the team who ran through the evidence or some of the evidence that had been missing from the previous inquiries, and it prompted a public inquiry into the Hillsborough disaster. And I had a great interview, a great chat with Phil about this relationship Celtic have with Liverpool. And obviously it goes back, it didn't start off too well back in '66 down at Anfield, where I've got an image, I'm going to put this up on the socials as well, where they picked up all the bottles that had been strewn onto the pitch after Celtic had been beaten 2-0. And yes, John, you're absolutely right. If you're going to say this, Bobby Lennox scored that night and it was a mile onside and it was chopped off. Celtic should have gone through and away goals. But one of those bottles struck a ball boy and he was actually in a coma. And then, of course, that was the semi-final of the European Cup Winners' Cup 1966. It was the second European Cup Winners' Cup semi-final that your late father played in, which is astonishing. They had made it in 1964 MTK Budapest. So our relationship with Liverpool didn't get off to the best start. The wee ball boy recovered, John, and when Liverpool came up to Glasgow to play the final against Borussia Dortmund, whose ex-manager is going to be managing our opponents tonight, the Celtic fans waited for them at the train stations to embrace them and obviously to say sorry for the young kid who had been struck. Our relationship with Liverpool has built from there. Do you have any affinity to the club, John? Or are you one of these guys like myself? I do. I've got to say I do. But if Liverpool, unless they're playing Rangers, if Liverpool get beat, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it because I'm a Celtic fan.
I don't care about English football. I just say, I couldn't care less. I'm a Celtic fan, and I don't have other clubs, unless you're talking about St Rochs or, something like that. So, I don't have secondary clubs. Now, Liverpool, to my mind, it was always, especially with Steven Gerrard being in charge, there now appears to have been a complete turnabout then, just because of what happened over, the forced warning and all so on. So essentially, they appear to have objected to that, the same as we did. So you had the very, very odd situation last night of a Scottish club singing the English national anthem to English fans and being booed for it. So that was pretty bizarre. Now, to be fair, I had to be told about that because I say, and again, I don't watch games involving Rangers. I have a friend of mine who I refer to as the Rangers scout, and he fills me in because I can't do that. I can't tolerate it. So, and again, in terms of affinity for them, yeah, it seems to have turned about now. I think that there's been, they might have realised, and again, on a social level, a social justice level, we are far more in line with the values I think they like to think that they have. So, again, that was different when Steven Gerrard was there because, his presence alone seemed to make it difficult for them to support us. So, look, fair play. I mean, the Hillsborough thing as well, it was absolutely just desperately terrible thing to happen. So they've always had my sympathy. I've never disliked them as a club, but I don't care. English football as well, I just don't like it. I don't like the money that's in it. I don't like the big fake bubble built up by Sky. And, myself and Kev spoke about this a few weeks ago, about just the complete inequity in the game. And, that bubble in England is part of it. It gets me fair annoyed when you look at teams that are getting relegated from the English Premiership, taking 100 million down with them. You know what I mean? Look, we are. I'm concerned with how we can combat that. That's my concern. That stupid money. How do we combat that? We can't combat it at the very top level, but I think Ange has shown. And Michael Nicholson has shown this year, and the backroom team, that with very, very astute, scouting and very, very wide knowledge of the world game, as opposed to just the blinkers on for certain countries, that we can potentially compete. Now, this is our first rung here, in this competition this year. But as I said also to Kev, we don't have a lot of time to get it right because this team will be picked apart. So, we really need to start getting it right before we lose all our most valuable assets in the summer.
Yeah. I mean, that is a concern. I'm going to come back to it because I'm going to pitch something to yourself, John, and to those in the comment section about how the game has changed and if there is another way to approach that. Is there another way to make inroads when you're not in that bubble of English football or in the top half dozen leagues where I seen a picture on social media and it looked like a wind-up, but actually it would have been right, it would have been true, where the Man United Man City game, Man City Man U game, where there's a fan wearing a Man United jersey in the first half and a Man City jersey in the second half. I mean, half and half scarves are bad enough, but I just cannot comprehend that. That isn't football. That isn't even football to me, John. So, had you been a footballer in the 1980s, John, and being interviewed by Match or Shoot, and they asked you who's your favourite second team, you, very much like Peter Grant, Paul McStay and Tommy Burns, would have replied Celtic Reserves, I am sure. And by the way, fair play to you, because Lawrence Conley's exactly the same. Joe Hamilton, it's going to be tough. Yeah, it is, Joe. But maybe we'll start clicking up front and get the goals we should have got in the first two games. And that goes back to your opening comments, John, where we're talking about, if they click and we don't, we're in trouble. But the same thing can happen. Celtic do have the talent, and you were also talking about the transfer windows. I was reading this morning a couple of their players are wanted by Chelsea to the tune of a combined fee of 100 million quid.
Yeah.
So, it looks as though whenever any club assembles a group of players in European football, if you're not regarded as one of the elite clubs in one of the top six leagues, then you're fair game. Because a richer club will come along and take away your best players. I mean, where will Mudryk, where will he end up, in the next 2 or 3 years, John, for example?
Going back with Mudryk, I'm amazed he hasn't gone already. Absolutely amazed he hasn't gone already. And everyone who listens to this on a Wednesday will know how much I've been banging on about this, but Shakhtar are basically a one-man team. So, I'm amazed he hasn't gone already. In terms of the two boys that you're talking about potentially lined up for Chelsea for 54.3 and then 46 points. You're talking about Nkunku and then Guardiola, the young centre half. Now, therein lies the dichotomy for tonight, right? Because Nkunku looks a fabulous player, but he hadn't scored for 5 games. Before the weekend. It'd been 5 games without a goal. And he scored 2 at the weekend, but one of those was a penalty, and he also missed a penalty. And he scored another very good goal on the break, the kind of thing that really makes me nervous. But he hadn't scored for 5 games before that. Timo Werner's come back. They both play in essentially the same position, so they're tripping over each other. They seem to do all right against Bochum, but again, that's the bottom team in the league, so that doesn't mean anything. And they have solid players, a few of whom who will be wanted, or who are very much sought after. They have some very solid players, but they have guys that aren't playing well. They've got a problem at fullback. They're not particularly playing well in defensively or in the middle of the park. So there's plenty there for us to exploit. They are very close to us. I mean, he's almost certainly going to set up in a 4-3-3. Right. So he's going to set up essentially the same as we do. So it is going to be, we're going to be going toe to toe with these guys, because Ange isn't going to back down or play defensively. Although that does remind me of one thing that, you think the players don't really notice this thing, but there was a point after 80 minutes against Motherwell. Distinctly remember Callum McGregor bombing forward and Jota refusing the run. He just refused point blank to go on and pass him. He deliberately held back, made McGregor pass it back to him. It's just like, let's just calm down here and take the win. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, the players are well aware of the importance of this as well. But we are going to have, and this is why I'm really hoping Kyogo finds his shooting boots tonight, we are going to have chances. Yeah. And there's a very strong possibility this just boils down to who takes their chances, because we're going to give them up and we're going to get them. So it just boils down to who takes their chances. And, there are issues, defensively as well for them. So, we're not the only ones with that issue. So again, I just don't know how it's going to go, because our guys really need to show up tonight. They really need to show up. Guys need to stand tall who have been quiet for the last few weeks. So we really need them to show up with the playing at their peak tonight, because this game is very, very important.
Yeah, no, you're right. We're going to talk about some of the individuals who, in order for us to get a positive result tonight, you really are looking for them to step up. You're looking for them to get back to the kind of form that we know they are capable of. Michael Ross, yes. Carter Vickers is a huge loss, absolutely. At this level, even domestically, massive loss for Celtic. We'll be having a wee look at the central defensive partnership, and we'll be asking the question how they're going to do tonight. Alan Robertson, with a draw away from home being a good result, I agree, especially as we have our 2 best centre-backs out injured. Actually, Alan, I would have, as I say, looked at the runny games and thought that an away result against Leipzig would have been great in any case. The fact that we've got 2 centre-backs out makes it even better. Is anybody else thinking about a double pivot in the midfield, or even a back 3 with Abildgaard? Well, let's talk about that, because I wouldn't expect I might be wrong, Alan, but I wouldn't expect Abelgard to play this game. We spoke about him perhaps playing the Motherwell game, JP and I. JP didn't think he would, and he was proven right. If there's going to be a shock, and we know Ange has done it in the past, if there's going to be a shock in the starting lineup, I think the shock's Haksabanovic. Don't know where he'll play him, but I think if somebody's going to start unexpectedly, it would be Haksabanovic rather than Abelgard. John, what's your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. He's already done it once. So we start Haksabanovic on the left, put Jota on the right, and play Kyogo through the middle. Now, I don't like that myself because Haksabanovic looks to be a very, very good player, but Jota, I think, is much better on the left. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I know Maeda isn't clinical, certainly not at the moment, but he does provide more sort of defensive cover. There are every time we think of like a double pivot or something like that, what Ange has done is he's picked individual players to fit in the system. He hasn't changed the system, right? So, when you start thinking about double pivot, all the rest of it, yeah, it's an interesting talking point, but it's not going to happen. He's not going to do it. He'll play his best team as he sees it, and that means fitting the fittest and most on-form bodies into the system as he likes to play it. He's not going to change the system, not in my view anyway, and we've never been wrong about that. He has, changed the system once we're 3-0 up, or, that sort of thing. He's brought on some more defensively minded midfielders, which is fine, but that's not how I don't think he'll go out to play the game that way at all. And nor would I in this case, because I think our best chance of beating them is to attack them. I don't think if we set up defensively, we're going to win this game. I think we have to take them on toe-to-toe, and I think we have enough to score. I don't think we have enough to stop them scoring. That's why I don't think we should set up defensively, because I think they're going to score anyway. And I think it's just a matter of who takes their chances and who gets the most. I mean, this could be 3-1 either way, or it could be a 2-2 draw, in my view. So I fully expect them to score against us. Coming on to the sort of centre-half pairing, I have an emotional investment in Stephen Welsh, in as much as that was the last thing my dad saw before he fell into unconsciousness and died the next day, was Stephen Welsh scoring the goal. So if anyone feels like you're after Welsh, you're going to have to come after him with more than that's how I feel about it, because I'll defend them to the hilt. But essentially, and this is going back to, and I noticed that you retweeted something I tweeted at the weekend. I was watching that game with Motherwell, and I was taking notes through it, so I was paying attention. Because I have to come on here and I have to know what I'm talking about, because my memory sucks, and if I don't take notes, I don't know. So I had Stephen Welsh down for one mistake, a ball that he passed and was intercepted, and then he had to take the boy down, got a booking against him. That's what I had him down for. As I understand it, his passing statistics were far superior to anyone else's. I think a lot of that frustration comes from the fact that if you find your two centre halves are distributing, they're trying to make creative passes, they're trying to break things down, that's because there's a team that's dug in. We haven't been able to draw them onto us. We can't play out and beat the press. And what we'd be hoping tonight is the opposite of that. Because that's how Mönchengladbach beat them 3-0 quite handy. They beat the press, they let them press, and the counter. They beat that press, and they beat them handy. So we have to be looking for that tonight. We have to be skillful. We have to be accurate. We have to play with pace, power, and purpose. And we have to be incisive. And I think we can be all those things, because especially if we get ahead early tonight, I think we can be all those things. We need our confidence up. And I think playing with space, instead of having to beat down the doors of teams that have dug in, is far more appealing to our players. I think that's the stage that they want to be on. They want to be comparing their skills like for like with other people who are attacking. So, it could be a tremendous game tonight, and I certainly hope we come out on top. But, again, I think our best form of defence is attack.
Listen, there's quite a few points there that we'll expand on, John, because on the subject of Welsh, there was some criticism on particularly the Facebook Acsom page around the post-match discussion after the Motherwell game. I am a fan of Stephen Welsh, and I think that goes back to when he's breaking into the team, speaking to someone who had watched him progress through the kind of youth ranks, John. And he says to me that in terms of his passing ability, his distribution was excellent. And he was a player that was kind of head and shoulders. And I think when you look at the underaged progression that he's had at international level, the fact he's the captain of the side, there's no doubt about that. But I would also throw in the fact that we have had 2 bids for Welsh. Now, I don't know if one of them is permanent and one of them is a loan deal from Udinese and Toulouse. So he's coming up on the radars, John, of clubs around Europe. And my take on this, and I would love for Alan Morrison to have a discussion about this at some point as well, is that these teams who really are investing a lot in the data are realising from the stats and from the figures that this kid at Celtic, because he is still young, is coming up with brilliant stats on a consistent basis. So the eye test that is mentioned time and time again, I sometimes think can be swayed by a perception of the individual. So it goes back to this bias that you might have against or for certain players. Some people say to me on the YouTube channel, for example, that I never criticise Kyogo or Juranovic. Now, we all have biases. This is a thing, John. So I'm not going to sit here and deny that I've got them, because we all do. But I think that sometimes it goes back to the players coming through the ranks where they seem to get a harder time. They've got to work that wee bit harder to win us over at times. Do you think Stephen Welsh suffers a bit from that?
Of course he does. Absolutely he does. As does Anthony Ralston. And it used to drive me nuts. Ralston would go out and have like a tremendous game, and you'd still got people absolutely slating him. And I mean, not just even related to the game, just, he's never good enough to be a player. Never mind how he played in the game. You've got that with Ralston, even when he was playing well. We've now got it with Welsh. Do they have to overcome that bias? I think they do. There's confirmation bias, and Welsh, did suffer from it from the weekend. You could see the crowd were getting restless, and it was pointed out. It was in fact Alan Morrison that pointed it out that. You're about 33 minutes in or something, and he misplaced a pass. Mm-hmm. And that was the first pass he'd misplaced for the whole game. And the crowd was just groaning and booing. And, so it is very much confirmation bias. You're looking for mistakes from these guys. We're looking for mistakes from the ends. Now, I covered this again in the St Mirren game. We're talking about, and our friends, I will acknowledge the fact that the one thing Stephen Welsh isn't great at is winning aerial duels. He's not a big guy, so he doesn't win aerial duels against other big people. Thankfully, that's not going to be a concern tonight, but he doesn't win those duels. So I can understand why people think he's getting bullied around the place. But he hasn't given away any goals as a result of that. Not that I can see. The mistake that he made for the goal against St Mirren was nothing to do with being, not winning a duel or, being dominated by someone. Basically had a grip of the guy and then took a step forward and fell over, and the boy just headed it in. So it was a mistake from Stephen, but it wasn't because he was being dominated. And in terms of his distribution, he was far and away our best passer by some distance against Motherwell. Mm-hmm. By some distance. So, think of the pressure of that as well. Your centre halves at that point, because we are pushed so far up and they're so deep, you're not just being asked to make the usual, 4 or 5 yard passes to the midfield. You're being asked to do something creative. Mm-hmm. You're being asked to sort of ping balls around the place. Are you going to make mistakes doing that? Yeah. Because, if you were good enough to do that, you'd be playing in the midfield. That's the problem. So, when you're asking us, when our centre halves are pushed so far up, we never play well. We very rarely play well like that because you're asking too much of them and there's not enough space. And Jens, I'd be, in terms of tonight, just jumping back onto that, in terms of tonight, I'd be more concerned about Jens because he doesn't turn quickly. He doesn't have the recovery pace. So I'd be far more concerned about that tonight. We're not going to be worried about aerial duels tonight. That's not where they're going to be scoring from. They're going to be on the counter-attack and there's going to be balls over the top. So, retreating quickly and also your positional awareness are going to be absolutely crucial. Obviously, losing our first choice centre-halves is a blow. But with the kind of game that we're going to have tonight, they wouldn't necessarily expose the weaknesses that these players have. It depends on how the system is set up and how deep we're going to play them. But it could be, but the thing is, they're just as easy beat with a ball over the top. Because I was watching them as well, so they are just as easy beat with a ball over the top. And in fact, when you're looking at, if you get them on the counter-attack, at one point against Dortmund, they were playing with a 2-2 base and 6 up front. So they had the 2 centre-halves, the 2 defensive midfielders. They had their 4 forward players in a very, very tight group in the middle, so that brought in the entire defence. And their full-backs were completely unmarked, miles out on the touchlines. So that's a very interesting philosophy. But if you get caught on the counter there, you're really struggling. Look, we're all disappointed about CCV and all the rest of it. But, as I say tonight, if Stephen and Maurice Jens, if they can basically hold their ground and not make any mistakes, and that's a big thing, if they just don't make any obvious errors, then I don't think that's going to be the issue. I don't think they are going to be the issue, And if anything, you're looking down that side. I mean, they've got pace all over the park, this lot. So, Greg Taylor could struggle. They've got a litany of front players who are very, very, very good. So Greg Taylor could struggle as he did, before against Bodo Glimt with people who are very, very quick, just with space behind, running past them. But again, he's been one of our better players all year, so you'd hope that doesn't happen. Look, if you're looking for problems, there are problems all over the park, right? So absolutely, we have to try and be positive and think that these guys, our guys, will play at the top of their game because there are problems all over the park. O'Reilly's not in particularly great form. The forwards, aren't playing particularly well for the most part. But the thing about it is, we know they can. We know they can. So I suppose if you're going to be a supporter, rather than just be an analyst, if you're going to be a supporter, you have to say, let's just, try and get behind that point. We can do this. We can. It's whether we will. But at least we can, Paul. At least we can. So we're not up against, the Paris Saint-Germains and some of the hideous groups we've had in the past where you're just getting out there waiting to get absolutely pumped. We can win this game. We can get a positive result.
You're right.
So, I'm trying to stick on that positive point.
Listen, I'm all for positivity, and you'll see that at the end of the show when I give you my prediction for the result tonight. I'm going to be really positive. But on the point that you made where there are areas that can be manipulated by both teams this evening, I thought it was very interesting, and I mentioned this on Monday, the comments that Chris Jullien made in relation to Ange Postecoglou's approach to identifying these weaknesses, John, and then homing in on them. He said it's like a game of chess to Ange, using video analysis, etc. So if there are any kind of weak areas within the ranks of our opponents this evening, then I'm pretty sure Ange is aware of them. The Celtic players will also be aware of them. And I'm going to break off for a moment because, as I said at the top of the show, 100 years since Jock Stein was born. And I want to talk a wee bit about that, and about it's going to lead into what next for Celtic. And I think, this is one just to debate, John. Jay McKelvey really think tonight will be a struggle with Welsh and Jens at the back, unfortunately. I'm going to go back. Last word on the central defence, right? I'm going to go back to Ibrox earlier this year. And it was a game that we played last season in April, whereby we had absolutely destroyed them in the February at Celtic Park, John. The only disappointment that night, we didn't score more than we did. And then we play them at Ibrox, and they took a very early lead. You'll remember Aaron Ramsey scored the goal. Mm-hmm. But Celtic's defensive performance in the 2-1 win was resolute. And I remember going up to that game, and if you were to check the Acsom bulletins leading up to that game, there was criticism about the Celtic defence leading into that game. And the two centre-halves were Cameron Carter-Vickers and Carl Starfelt, who are clearly the first-choice centre-halves. But now we're talking about the backups, and Cameron Carter-Vickers and Starfelt are untouchable. Listen, they have a great partnership, but leading up to that game, they were under criticism. The Celtic defence was being criticised, and they had a performance that day where we were under the cosh for a fair bit of that game, John, and the defensive display was outstanding, probably one of the best defensive displays by Celtic that season. The point that the reason I'm bringing it up is we had concerns going into that game at Ibrox in April about the defence. We've got concerns tonight, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have, but it's at times like this that they can rise to the occasion. And that is what I'm looking at tonight. That's as positive as I'm going to be tonight about the defence. I think Joe Hart can play a big part in that. He's got loads of Champions League experience, John. He'll play a big part in it. I think Juranovic, who came in for a lot of flack after the Motherwell game, will play a part in it. Taylor has been excellent all season. Get back to that form. And then, that kind of like, that osmosis almost, that permeates right through the actual team. So as a defensive unit, I'm looking for a big display tonight, and I'm hoping that we're going to get it.
Well, I mean, I thought that's how we were going to start out in the Motherwell game. I mean, my first page of notes says Welsh, excellent pass. Welsh, excellent pass. Welsh, very strong challenge. He nearly kicked the boy 6 feet in the air, a legit challenge in the first half, trying to make a point. Now, if you do that in one of these games, the crowd should just go mad. So, that would be fantastic if we're going to make a point. Joe Hart needs to, again, he's another guy who needs to stand up tonight because, one point there, and certainly in the Motherwell game, it's like he liked the line more than Robbie Fowler, and he was walking out like Johnny Cash, So, I mean, it's just the absolute refusal to come off his line. Now, he did come off his line a few times in the second half, but only when there's no bodies in front of him. Whenever there's bodies in front of him, he just won't commit to going for anything. So that concerns me. Normally, I don't think that's going to be an issue tonight, because what we're going to see tonight in terms of chances is more like the kind of chance that Mudryk took against us. Yeah. There's going to be a clean breakthrough, and Joe Hart's going to have the game of his life trying to stop them. So we need the centre-halves to be tremendous tonight. We need Joe Hart to be absolutely tremendous tonight. And if the rest of the boys are firing, there's a lot of ifs. There's an awful lot of ifs. But again, it's so difficult to say because we just don't know, who's going to turn up tonight. What team's going to turn up? Because if we turn up and play well, we can absolutely pummel them, and vice versa. So I just don't know. My sort of logical head is struggling to put a result on it, because there's no forum to speak of getting into this, which could really let you know one way or another. My supporters' head's a completely different thing. I'm quite clear on what we should be doing. But look, it's exciting, but very, very anxious. And I'm not even looking at the comments just now, because again, I'm too anxious to be looking at other people being anxious. So,
it spreads. The anxiety will spread. It breeds. Talking of which, I mean, Jock Stein, as I've said a couple of times, 100 years since he was born, and born on this day. I'm going to go through a few things in relation to this, because it does lead us on to where Celtic are right now. Why do we have aspirations? Why are we a club renowned around Europe? Well, it was Jock Stein and the team that he built that gave us these aspirations. And I always go back to that. I mentioned earlier on, Celtic reached the semi-final of the 1964 European Cup Winners' Cup, MTK Budapest, and we should have gone through. I mean, look it up if you're a wee bit younger, but after the first leg, we should certainly have got through to the final. And then we came close again a couple of years later against Liverpool. But the 12 years, said it a million times, you'll be thinking that I'm banging the same drum. That 12-year period from 64 to 76, Celtic got to at least a quarter-final of European competition on 9 occasions. That is astonishing, right? So people who maybe look at the record books and say, well, you only had to win 9 games to win the European Cup or any of this nonsense. Celtic at that point were as close to being a European superpower as the likes of Ajax became in the 1970s. And when you look at Jock Stein and what he did at Celtic, it was really astonishing. And the words that stood out for me this week, John, from Ange Postecoglou, he's good when it comes to words. I'm standing on his shoulders, not following in his footsteps. And we've spoken long and hard about Ange Postecoglou and how he got loads of inspiration from Ferenc Puskas, who was his manager at South Melbourne Hellas from 89 to 92. But we've got to go further back than that. We've got to go back to the 1940s and a guy called Jimmy Hogan. Now, when you think of the great Hungarian side of the 1950s, they were managed by Gustav Sebes. I hope I got that pronunciation right. I think I got the Leipzig one right. He was the manager of the Hungary side who beat England 6-3. Now, in that side, of course, was Ferenc Puskas, who scored a couple of goals. The tape of that game was said to be worn out by Jock Stein. Why Jock Stein loved the Hungarian side? Well, it was down to that game and the fact that he watched them play in the 1954 World Cup. And the reason he watched them play in the 54 World Cup is because Celtic had won the double, 53-54, and the board treated the players to go to the World Cup, John. And a few Celtic players were representing Scotland at the World Cup, Neely Mockin included. The rest of them sat in the stands and probably twiddled their thumbs, but no Jock Stein. He was like you against Motherwell. He was taking notes. And he fell in love with Hungary. He fell in love with that side. And that side were hugely influenced by an Englishman called Jimmy Hogan. And I'm going to read out another quote. This comes from the manager of that 1954 Hungarian side who beat England in 1953 at Wembley 6-3. They got to the final of the World Cup in 54. And Sebes says of Jimmy Hogan, "We played football as Jimmy Hogan taught us." Jimmy Hogan, of course, comes to Celtic Park in 1948 and was an influence in Jock Stein, who later arrived in 1951. Jock Stein already had been watching this Hungarian side in later years and became obsessed with them, if you believe Archie Macpherson and the excellent biography that he wrote of Jock Stein. So what we've got there is connections to Jock Stein and Jimmy Hogan and Hungarian football and Ferenc Puskas. Fast forward to the late 80s and Puskas goes over to Melbourne and he meets a guy called Ange Postecoglou and he plays a massive part in Ange's formation of a strategy, John. And so the Jock Stein spirit, the Jimmy Hogan spirit, lives on to this day through our current gaffer, Ange. And he's spoken long and hard about Ferenc Puskas and the inspiration and the influence of that man in his philosophy. Now, part of the philosophy of Jock, as you know, is to rear your own players into a strategy, into a formation that you don't change. You play your way. I think the only game that he ever came into for criticism for playing defensively was away against Dukla Prague just to get through the tie, where it was nothing each and he played one up front with Stevie Chalmers. So my question to you, John, right, is, and it's maybe a kind of sweeping generalisation, should Celtic look at going back to a scenario where we are basically rearing our own footballers? And are we doing that enough? Because at the moment, as you say, we're on the first rung of the Champions League ladder here in a new era under Ange Postecoglou. Will it work? Will it not work? Who knows? Financially, our strategy has worked in terms of recruitment, buying them in relatively cheaply, selling them on at a profit. But can we do more in the old kind of school way that Jock Stein did it, bringing players through for the success of Celtic Football Club?
Well, you would hope so, but I had a look back. If you go back at the last... I tried to keep it within about 20 years. So, let's say from 2000-ish onwards. I just had a look at all the academy players who have contributed anything at all, really, to the first team. And in that period, which is now 22 years, there have been 28 players. Those 28 players, we've had transfers of 42.565 million. Now, obviously, a good chunk of that was Tierney. So without Tierney, it's 18.265. But anyway, so 28 players at 42.565, and there is currently in the squad academy players worth 19.25 million. So in total, you're looking at, over the last sort of 20 odd years, generated 61.82 million in transfers and value. Plus, you've got another sort of 8 players there that gave us 2.5 years service each on average. And that's not accounted for in any of those figures. So you would say the academy as it stands is costing 3 million a year to run. I don't know what it was costing 20 years ago, but what I would say is we'll be lucky if we've broken even there, or at least it'll be very, very close to breaking even. So in terms of, and that's with one generational size transfer, which, again, we didn't see that in the previous 20 years, or the 20 years before that, to be fair. So that's a huge transfer in there, and we've just broken even. And the list of names, I have to tell you, there's some good players, but it's, of those 28 players, it's a pretty meh list. It's not complete. It's not an inspirational list. But there's been, obviously Kieran Tierney and people like that. So but apart from that, James Forrest is still around. You're talking about Stephen McManus and Callum McGregor, and but you're also talking about the likes of Killian Sheridan and Dylan McGeoch and James McCarthy still counts. Darnell Fisher apparently counts, if you remember him. Josh Thompson, people like that. Philip Twardzik, even Karamoko Dembele technically had at least one appearance. So these are included in that 28, and their contribution to the first team is very minimal, as are at least half the names on that list. You're talking about minimal contributions. So do we have to do something different? Yes, and I would say that we have to start with, I don't understand the current setup. Why have we got a team in the 5th tier? What is the Lowland League going to teach anybody? I just don't get it. I don't understand what we hope to achieve. Are we seriously saying these guys are going to make that step up? Would we sign someone from that league?
No, so you wouldn't go near a player. Yeah.
No, if our boys are playing them and they get schooled by a couple of guys in that league, are we going to sign the guys that schooled them? You wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. It's for me, I don't understand what we're trying to achieve. There is far too big. And I know that the reserve leagues had to be abandoned back in the day because there wasn't a lot of money knocking about. But could we not re-establish a reserve league now? I mean, there's enough money surely to, and the squads are big enough now, and the game's professional enough now where we could do that. That's fair enough in the 1980s where there was no money knocking about and everyone was struggling. But the game, there's enough money in the game now, I think, to have a reserve league. I don't understand why we don't. Because for the life of me, I cannot see the point in this. Can't see the point in it. But what are we trying to do with those young fellas? That B squad to me is completely pointless. So starting from there and working downwards, because that's the sort of elite level of the academy. Mm-hmm. So there's an intermediate level and a junior level. So that's the elite level of the academy. And your elite, what we're basically saying is our elite level is Lowland League standard. I don't understand.
And we want those players, as we did last season, we want those players to sit on the bench as part of a European squad, John. So how well prepared are they going to be if that's the level they're playing at?
Oh my God. It'll be slaughter, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. And the other thing as well, how can you possibly tell if they're good enough, playing in that environment? Mm-hmm. What does the coaching staff learn from that? I'd be amazed if you can show me another league where there's a similar setup anywhere in Europe. I'd be astonished. You know?
I think that you were talking there about the Reserve League, something that comes up all the time when you speak to ex-players. We will be talking to ex-player Brian McClare in January, by the way, shameless plug, but the gig is sold out at this moment in time. We will be returning to Gracies in February, and yesterday, if you were hanging about Hart Hill Services, you would have seen me talking to another Celtic legend, John. I don't know how many of you are hanging about Hart Hill Services, but it looked all a bit dodgy. Meeting in the middle of that, was it an overpass or an overhang? In any case, if you want to get a ticket, guarantee your ticket for that, go to the link underneath this video, add your name, your email address rather, and you will hear first when the tickets become available. But whenever you talk to these guys, even players that played in the 80s and the 90s when there was a reserve league, they always bemoan the absence of that competitive bridge between youth player and first team. And like you say there, in terms of the money, there is also money that is allocated to each team. And it should be ring-fenced for youth football. It should be ring-fenced for academy football. I think in the past that has been abused and teams have gone out and bought players with the money. But if that was ring-fenced and then obviously fed into a reserve system, I think that what you would find is the development of players would be vastly improved. Sometimes, John, all you need to do is play alongside or against somebody who's a wily old cat who's maybe coming back from injury, who's maybe out of favour, fell out with the gaffer, coming back, etc. And, playing alongside him in the central defence. I remember some of the young Celtic players like Stuart Balmer telling me that the education he got playing for the reserves alongside Tom McAdam was better than any textbook or any coaching that he ever received. Just, actually going out there and doing it and learning from a guy who was an old head.
But the gap is so big. We were giving Christopher Julian a bit of abuse because of his attitude when he had to go and play in the B team. But it is an insult. It's an insult to ask that guy to play at that level. If you were him, and I know people are going to say, "Oh no, he wants to play for Celtic at any level." But that guy, you're talking about an £8 million player, and yes, he's coming back from injury, but he's playing with wee boys. And he's playing with wee boys against other wee boys, or against hammer throwers who are going to break his legs if they get the chance. So, again, there's no use to us. There's no value to us in rehabbing our own first-team players. There's no value to the academy players in playing at that level. I fail to see, or I fail to be convinced by any argument as to why this is a set-up. I think we need to restart that structure immediately and try and find, but the problem is you need the agreement of all these other clubs as well. So it's not just as easy as that, But from our point of view, we can't have the end point of the elite academy being the Lowland League. We can't have that, And also, what is? But there's really no path. There is no path. Because what you're going to do, you're going from the Lowland League and then you're going to start training with the first team squad, but you're not going to play. You're not going to, and how many games, and we've seen this season alone, there's too much at stake now. There's Champions League qualification at stake. You're not going to be getting runouts there for someone who has made that much of a jump. It's a huge jump. You make that jump, up 5 leagues or whatever it is, and suddenly come into Celtic's first team and play in a game where, we have to win, as we do with all these games. I just don't see how that ever happens. It's not a path for these boys. So even the good ones, you're going to lose them. You're going to ultimately lose them because they'll go and find another path. So I just don't see how it's set up that way. And we need to be so much better at it. Our academy has not produced over the years. As I say, we're lucky if we've broken even. So I think we need to do much better. But you would hope, Paul, that this is part of the structures that are coming in now. We want to have a proper, football department, and that's part of it. So it's not always done in a wing and a prayer and based on, what the last guy did for 5 minutes. So we need to have far better structures. They need to be far more reliable, and we can't always have, as I said before on this show, Ange came in and did some unbelievable business for us, picking up, players for peanuts. That's not going to happen again. That's very, very unlikely to happen again. So where are we always going to rely on like really unbelievable scouting? You know, because we have to be so much better and so much more tuned in than everyone else. Because if we can't rely on bringing our own through, that's going to be a problem going forward. You know, and it's been a problem in the past already, but, you know, it's very unlikely we can carry on as we have with the scouting level that we have, with bringing in, you know, essentially £5 million players for £1.5 million. So that's not going to continue. So we have to have a legacy structure. We have to have something there which will continue in the years to come. You know, and it's, you know, again, as I said this last week, it's a generational club. You know, you want your own children to follow it. So there's no point in saying, oh, you know, oh, it's too difficult to do it now. It has to be done. It has to be done. It has to be dealt with. You know, otherwise this same conversation happens 20 years from now.
Exactly. There's a couple of things that you've mentioned. First of all, I remember on this show, Chris Julian getting a wee bit of stick for the attitude that you were talking about. But you've got to remember, this is a guy who was part of an under-20 World Cup squad for France who won the World Cup. And, you know, fast forward 10 years and he's playing against the same age guys he was playing 10 years ago. So yeah. I can understand why a player at that level would find it difficult to motivate himself. The argument, I think at the time, was he's wearing the Celtic jersey, he needs to try, he can be a great inspiration to the young kids he's playing with. I get that as well. Talking of which, Celtic's B team are playing Leipzig today, as they do in the afternoon of the Champions League, and they're winning 2-1. Rocco Vata opened the scoring, who I think...
I take all that back, Paul. I take all of that back. It's a fantastic structure.
And I've got to say, he is the one... he's the player that, you know, I'm sure will have a lot of attention. We have already got potentially a lost generation of talent. Nobody knows how well they're going to do, all these young kids who have left for various clubs all over Europe. However, we need to keep Rocco Vata, that's for sure. One final thing before we go, John. Prediction. Tonight, how's it going to go?
I will take a 2-2 draw, but... with my supporters' head on, we're going to beat them 3-1.
Right, brilliant. I would also take a 2-2, but we're going to beat them 3-2. There we go. Positivity reigns at Celtic State of Mind. Don't believe the hype. Yeah, absolutely. John, my first appearance on the show with you has been utterly enjoyable. That was a very quick hour. Thank you very much for everybody getting involved. Thank you to John Hughes for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.